All right, so here we are on day number 28, closing up with a new record in the account, which is a win of $568.39, just above 19% ROE. And no doubt that is a great result. I definitely made a lot of money today, and that's great. But leave it to me to be upset about a day where I book, such a huge result and break records and, all this. But the truth is, I'm really quite disappointed in quite a few spots today. And that's what the majority of this recap is going to be talking about because I feel like I set myself up to make some really big mistakes, and I did make quite a few mistakes, not necessarily huge ones, but definitely some noteworthy ones. And so the way I feel about this day is kind of like when you were a kid or something and your parents tell you, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. Well, that's how I feel about today. I'm super happy to be able to get away with this result. But the road that I took to book this result today was one that I do have quite a few problems with. So let me start by saying that I don't intend to really go through each of my trades today in great detail, and that's for two reasons. The first is that I did record a good percentage of this day. I have yet to look at the footage, but I'm pretty sure that I got three of my trades recorded. So what I'm going to do with that footage is break it down into trades and then release them as narrated trades on that new playlist that I started. The other reason that I won't be going too deep into the trades today is because I want to talk about everything surrounding the trade. Once again, as is frequently the case, it was my behavior leading up to the day that determined how I played this day. And that's where a lot of disciplinary failures took place. And so that's what I'm going to be focusing on in this recap. So before I go over to the trade log and show you all the numbers, I will extend this 1 minute chart a little bit and just kind of show you the arrows, which are a lot more visible when it's zoomed out. This one up here is my practice trade. So this P&L is not actually accurate. The one that I just showed you is what I finished with. And I'll get to that later. But I just wanted you to have a visual of where exactly my trades took place within the day. This dotted vertical line represents the pre-market and after hours cutoff. And so this is the bell. This one right here is the bell. So as we switch over to the trade log with my 6 trades highlighted from today, I'll slide over a little bit so you can see them. I did only trade one symbol today, and that was KRTX. But before I get into that, I want to talk about something I said on Friday, which was that last week was one that was really overflowing with too much work. I overworked myself and I didn't have enough fun. And so I did have fun this weekend. On Friday night, I played online poker for the first time in like a year. And the very first tournament that I entered, I won it. I finished first out of 380 players and made something like 110 times my buy-in back. And so that made me feel really good. And on Saturday, I went out and I went to the casino, which was more of a party night. But I did end up playing about an hour's worth of poker too. And I didn't really have a lot of fun. The table that I sat down on was just full of depressing people. And so when I found myself up like 400% in the session, I decided to just leave and go have some fun. And that's exactly what I did. I treated my friends to a steak dinner at the restaurant, and we had a great night. But the problem took place last night on Sunday, where a friend of mine came back from hunting, and he, wanted to hang out. And I was just about to start on some work at the time that he called me, and he's like, "Hey, want to come over and drink and screw around and play cards?" And I immediately said yes, even though I had really sort of set it in my mind to do some work last night and have a calm night. As soon as that call came in, it was like, yeah, of course I want to, go joke around and drink and play cards. like, And so last night what happened was we ended up staying there, or I stayed there until 2 a.m., I think was around the time that I left. But by the time that I got home and had something to eat and, drank a bunch of water and actually got into bed, I think it was somewhere around 3 a.m. To be honest, I don't even remember. And that's largely because of how much I drank last night, which was quite a bit. And drinking is something that really affects my sleep. I tend to not really have a lot of REM sleep following nights when I go to bed, really intoxicated from alcohol. And last night was no exception. My body woke me up at 7 a.m., which was not the plan. I wanted to sleep in until about 8:45, and I, preempted my alarm by about an hour and 45 minutes and decided not to go back to bed. And my physical condition when I woke up was not stellar whatsoever. If you think I sound a little bit weird right now, it's because I still feel pretty congested, which was one of the symptoms that I felt when I woke up. And my body like was really beat. I didn't feel good at all. And that was because of the lack of discipline that I showed the night before. And the discipline failures didn't stop there. I didn't complete a large portion of my pre market checklist. And the only reason that I allowed myself to trade was because of how much conviction, how much faith I had in KRTX, which is the one that I saw pre market. And so now let's get into the trades that I took. And the first one that I took was one that almost had me cutting the day off and going back to bed, which is a decision that I reversed, and it led to some really dodgy moments. So that first trade, I saw an opportunity where I thought above 32.90, there was a good chance that we could squeeze. There was a lot of overhead room, and I really liked the situation. And so I decided to try to scalp a few bucks on that first move. And that's exactly what I did. In 6 minutes and 29 seconds, I booked more than $2.50 on a risk setup that was great. And so on a 50 share position, I found myself booking $131 in net profit. And at that time, I thought to myself, like, you're coming off a pretty bad day on Friday. And, you kind of reacted poorly to approaching that $3,000 mark that was one of the primary goals for this account. And so I thought, well, this $131 puts me well above that line. And, I'm not in great shape right now. I was in the middle of breaking a bunch of pre-market checklist items by taking this trade before I was ready. And so I thought maybe the best thing to do is just to go back to bed and just forget this whole situation and just accept this win. But that isn't what I did, obviously. And as you can see by the times, only, like 7.5 minutes later, I got into another trade. And it was one that I think started out really good and that I had a good plan. But it's one where I succumbed to what I call FOGO, which is the fear of getting out. The fear of missing out, which is FOMO. That's where you take a questionable entry and you get into a stock. In this case, in FOGO, I'm worried that if I stop out, that it's going to make the move that I was waiting for, and then I'm going to miss out on it. And that's really what I succumbed to on this trade. And it saw me break a lot of rules in this trade. I mean, it looks good on paper. It looks like, oh, nice, you scaled in and scaled out. 2.7% is not exactly something to write home about, but this is still a substantial winner. And all of a sudden, I'm up like 330 bucks on the day on two trades, and it looks as if it's good. But what I'll do is open up my broker screen here and show you just what happened and just how uncharacteristic this trade was. So after this in and out scalp, you can see my entry on this second trade was, my first entry was at 36.42, and I held that all the way down into the 29s. And after I broke through my initial stop, which was only a little bit lower than my initial entry, after I got washed through that stop, I decided that I was ready to hold to 29, which was where the support was. And I'll zoom in to show you like just exactly what I held through and how sketchy this was. So 34.80 is where I was planning to risk off of, and I wanted to see a high of day breakout, which I thought would be the start of the next leg. And my entry took place on this candle right here. And you can see that I pretty much bought the top here. And it started to sell off, and it did not get better. You can see that it went very far down. And so even though it looks good on paper, and I do actually feel that I made a lot of good adjustments and that the way that I averaged down was actually pretty smart. I'm not going to get super deep into it, but basically I let myself go so deep into the red on this trade that if I had stopped out of my complete position once I was done adding to it, this could have been a trade where I went from being up $131 on the day to being down more than $250 on the day. And again, I'm not going to get super deep into it. My reasoning at the time was that this is going to be a home run. I was super convinced at this point already that this was going to be the big play of the day. And so instead of just sticking to the rules and just stopping out and taking a little bit bigger loss than I wanted to take, and then getting back in later, which would have been much safer, I ended up averaging down and making this a really long trade. You can see that I held for over an hour and 17 minutes, which was into the bell. my final exit on this was at 9:34 and 33 seconds. And so I went through a very long period of holding this trade, and I felt uncomfortable for a lot of it. Even though once it did bounce, my confidence really started ramping up. I feel that the amount of risk that I took by not stopping out where I should have ended up costing me quite a bit in unrealized profits, and that's really what the problem is on this trade. And I really don't want to show the charts on this because I know I'm going to get sucked into a long explanation and this will be a 45-minute video. So we're not going to do that. Instead, I'll just go through the next trades. So I'm going to go over the next four pretty quickly, more so than the last one, because the last one was really the turning point. I think that that second trade is what made me nervous for the rest of the day, and I never really recovered from how I felt early on in that trade, which was scared. And for the rest of the day, I traded like scared money. I undercapitalized the winners, even though a lot of my lackluster results going forward were due to dirty resolution, like not really clean moves and things that I didn't have control over. I do feel like I should have done better anyway. And this next one, this is one that I probably like the most following my gross one here, my second one. I averaged in really safely with an average of 48.05, and nothing was ever at risk of going super wrong on this. And I did book a pretty good result, 6%. That's pretty strong. $3 a share on $48 entry. That's pretty strong too. So I'm kind of okay with this one, but I think the most important part of this one is what I missed in between. So you can see if we open up my broker again, you can see my last exit on that dangerous trade was at $36. And $36 was the level where we were setting up again. If we look at the 1 minute chart here, the top of this second candle is 35.78, and then we pulled back to 34 and started pushing up again. And if I had been looking at this with a clean mind and with, good rest, and I was in good shape, I really think this is the spot where I would have been looking to add really aggressively and to load up for the big move. And I didn't. You can see I exited early. When it looked like we were going to double top off the previous high, I decided to take some off the table. And then same thing happened on the very next candle where I got out at 36 bucks. And from there, as you can see, I mean, we just exploded. And so this next trade here, the third one, this was me after having missed that big rip. This was me playing the same type of pattern where there's a pullback from the highs and then I'm getting in for another high of day breakout. And at this point too, we were really chasing a halt level. It was kind of surprising how many times we false halted going up. And the halts, whenever I see them come up, I find them enticing. And I was proud of myself to not have chased those halts. So that's one thing I'm really happy about on this trade is that I didn't chase. I waited for the good entry and I did take it, and I ended up with a low risk entry and set up on this trade. And even though my exits were a little bit early, I do feel that even if I had held longer, I would have eventually cut it loose maybe in the mid 50s, because once again we were false halting over and over and over. And that to me is an early sign of a pending reversal. And so I probably would not have chased that halt any further. I certainly would not have added. I'm still not 100% sure if I dislike this loser more than I like how much risk I took on my second trade, but I know that it's very, very close. So on this trade, after we halted finally at 58.46, there was a really weak resumption, which I was actually happy about. And I saw the bounce coming off of 53 and decided to risk off that level. And on the next candle, when we started pushing up and it looked like we were going to break high of day, I took my starter at whatever it was there, 57.91. And I had intended once again to add fairly aggressively going up. And my hard stop at this point, throughout the whole trade, was $53. That was the level that I did not want to see break. And what happened was we broke down through my primary stops and came back down to 53. And what you'll see is that I took an early exit at 53.20. And the reason that I took that exit was extremely weak. It was because I didn't want to experience slippage once we broke down past 53. What I was trying to protect against by taking this exit was basically just saving 50 cents per share. And when you're getting in on a risk setup that has you risking $5, like, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to be worried about an extra 50 cents. And if we fast forward the chart, you will see that $53 never got broken. On this candle I exited on, the bottom was 53.01, and the reaction that came off of that was a volume spike to the upside. And instead of just holding this through and then adding as we broke through high of day, I stopped out, which booked, 120 something dollar loss and cut deeply into my P&L, which was $555 at that time, which was really solid, especially given all the mistakes I'd made. And instead of doing that, I ended up taking another entry as we broke high of day to make another trade. And then, that other trade didn't go super well either. I ended up booking only 36 bucks on that one. And then I followed it up with another kind of dodgy trade where I had 3 entries. I scaled in well. And then once again, I got out right before the rip. And that's when I decided, I'm not going to keep letting myself do this. I've already taken 6 trades on a day where I probably should have taken 0. And even if we accept that I did get involved, I think, the best plan was probably what I had right after I closed this one. The first one was just, let's book this 131. Let's be happy with it. And let's work on, improving discipline and not getting super smashed the night before and coming home and going to bed at, 3 a.m. And so this is the point in the day when I put my foot down and I said, that's it. I can no longer allow myself to trade under these conditions. Physically and mentally, I was not all there. I did do quite a few smart things today that I won't discuss, but I do think that there were some adjustments in there and some tape reading where I was pretty on point, and my hands were pretty fast too when they needed to be, which was good. But there were also a lot of areas that are uncharacteristic, like this average down thing that I did on my second trade. That's really not something that I like to do. And if I do it, it shouldn't be that far of an average down. Like my first entry was 36.42, and then I found myself adding at 29.87 at one point, and my hard stop was $29. And I feel like there was enough room in there for me to just stop out and get back in, which is kind of like shorting your own position. And so all this to say is that after I closed this trade, which took 38 minutes to only book 2.9% of not even $100 P&L. I thought to myself, like, man, you left so much on the table today. You left like maybe $1,500 on the table. And then I thought, are we really going to take the risk of reversing this day and possibly even going back into the red? And I thought the happiness that I will feel if I were to double this result and go up to like $1,200 on the day is not enough to justify how annoyed I'm going to be if I go back to 0 or below 0, or even if I just cut it back to like $100. I felt that I would be really frustrated with myself if I let myself do that, and that also it's Monday. I don't want to do something like that on the first day of the week and then have it potentially affect the way that I trade going forward. So I really wanted to end on a good note. And even though there was a lot of sloppiness and I wasn't super happy with myself, I did feel like, ending on a green trade is probably the right decision today. And I think something that's worth noting is taking a look at my practice trade here, which I took after I locked up. And this is it right here. And you can see I booked a $556 winner, which is only 5%. And this was an $11,000 position that, once again, it didn't really go super smoothly. I had to hold through a long period of kind of dead volume and some weird price action. I found myself not sure what to do in no man's land. That is in between my average entry and my stop. I wasn't sure how to react. There were a couple times where I kept thinking about just cutting it loose in the red, and I decided not to. But I think the most important sort of point of analysis of this practice trade is how long it took. This is another 31-minute hold where I had to stay hyper-focused, and I drained myself mentally by watching everything and being as alert as I could be, at least within my condition. And as a result, I ended up booking my profits too early. I didn't hold. So these are my 2 entries on my practice trades, and right away it goes south and comes close to my stop, which was $70. And I did wait for it to actually break $70, which it did not. And it bounced off that level and ended up ripping. And as it turns out, it went all the way up to $100. And yet, look at where my exits are. I did sell into strength, but I think the best argument is that I missed out on holding further. And there was a period of time through right here all the way up to this candle here, all the way up to $92. There was not a single 1-minute candle that broke below the low of the previous candle. And so that means that I could have comfortably held all the way up into the 90s, and I didn't. And so even though this practice trade looks like a really awesome winner, it isn't. So to analyze this day, going back to the bigger picture, is I think there are a lot of things that I'm going to be studying about how I played this and what I can improve on, because I do feel like I failed myself in a lot of ways. And even though I am proud of quite a few things that I did, for example, I recognized this stock immediately as the home run play, and I called it out in the Velocity chat room on YouTube. I was like, this is what I think is going to happen. It's going to, squeeze up huge, and I'm looking for like a $20 move. And this thing is going to be on halt watch and etc. And I was more than right. In fact, the stock outperformed my expectations by quite a bit. But the point is that, I saw this big winner happen in my head beforehand, and it unfolded, exactly the way I wanted and then some. And despite that, I did not capture it the way I should have. I think I should have been finishing today with like a $2,000 winner. And that's part of a pattern that is kind of bothering me here, because I did the same thing on CNST, and NXTC is another one that could potentially be grouped in there. And I keep, seeing these plays in advance and being right. Like my accuracy on predicting these moves a lot of the time is huge. And yet I'm not really capitalizing on it. And I'm not, even though I have the mental conviction and I think, okay, this is what's going to happen, I get kind of sidetracked by the shorter term, and I end up overreacting to the shorter term moves. And that's something that I think is really costing me some missed winners. Now, on the bright side, of course, I am going to be opening tomorrow a huge step ahead of where I was today. And a really important psychological thing that's happened here is that I blew through the $3,000 milestone. So in my head right now going forward, $3,000 equity that's a level that I never want to break down below again. So in my head, I feel like I have $509 of wiggle room as to how I can push forward and continue progress. And that's a really big deal, because if I only had like $80, I know from experience that I would be really hesitant to risk more than $80, because I wouldn't want to fall back below that $3,000 line. And in this case, I have $500 to play with, so to speak. And I think that's a really good thing. So even though I undercapitalized on this day, even though I underperformed, even though my discipline game was shit, I do believe that this is going to have a positive effect, and that the money I made today is really going to help me push forward and help me make better decisions. And so now, I find myself in a position I didn't expect to be in. It's November 18th, and I've got 2 full weeks of trading before this simulator expires, and I have to decide whether I should renew or whether I go back live. And so right now, what I'm trying to focus on going forward is becoming comfortable with larger numbers. I really want to see myself be able to scale into bigger positions and to hold them longer, and to be okay with being up, let's say $400 on a trade, and then having it retrace to 200 without stopping out in an illogical place. That's something I really want to see from myself. And one thing I do want to point out is that I have a tremendous amount of personal stress happening right now. There are a lot of things going wrong for me surrounding this account, and I feel like I should be pretty quick to excuse myself on some of the mistakes that I've been making, because I am dealing with way higher than normal stress levels. And I do think that's really noteworthy. I think I'm battling through it pretty well. So I can't be too quick to beat myself up on days where I do make a lot of mistakes. I'm walking away with a home run day on a day where I made a lot of mistakes. And even though I may have left like $1,500 on the table, I do feel like I need to excuse myself a little bit from those missed gains. So anyway, that's going to be a wrap for this one, guys. I hope you found it helpful. As always, if you have questions, comments, feel free to leave them below. And I certainly hope to be following this up with a lot cleaner results than I had today. So until next time, this is Alex saying happy trading.